It starts quietly. A decision that feels small in the moment, almost invisible. A purchase you barely think about. A payment you justify without much resistance. A promise to yourself that you will be more careful next time. But then something strange happens. It happens again and again, in slightly different forms, in slightly different moments, but with the same outcome. Money slips through your hands in ways you did not fully intend. Not because you are careless, not because you do not care, but because something deeper is guiding those choices in the background. And that is where the real story begins. Because most people assume bad money decisions come from a lack of knowledge. If you just knew more, you would do better. If you just had better information, you would make smarter choices. But reality is far more subtle and far more personal. The truth is, your financial decisions are rarely made in calm, rational moments. They are made in emotional ones. In moments where stress is high, patience is low, and the mind is searching for relief rather than strategy. Think about the last time you made a financial decision you later regretted. It probably did not happen during a quiet, thoughtful planning session. It likely happened when you were tired, distracted, frustrated, maybe even trying to feel better after a long day. In those moments, money stops feeling like numbers on a screen and starts feeling like emotion in motion. A quick reward, a sense of control, a temporary escape. And that's where patterns begin to form. Because the mind is incredibly good at learning shortcuts. If something once made you feel better, even briefly, it will try to repeat it. Not because it is logical, but because it is familiar. And familiarity feels safe. This is why people often find themselves repeating the same financial cycles. Spending to feel better, saving only when guilt appears, avoiding financial planning until pressure becomes unavoidable. It's not a lack of discipline in the way people usually think about it. It's a pattern of emotional conditioning playing out quietly in the background. And there is another layer that often goes unnoticed. The world around you is constantly shaping your relationship with money. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle ones. Every advertisement, every social comparison, every carefully curated image of success creates a silent suggestion about what your life should look like, and more importantly, what you might be missing. Over time, these suggestions accumulate. They build pressure, not always loud pressure, but persistent pressure. The feeling that you are slightly behind, slightly lacking, slightly out of step with where you are supposed to be. And when that feeling becomes strong enough, financial decisions stop being about what you truly need. They start becoming about what might make that feeling disappear, even if only temporarily. So you spend, or you commit to things you did not fully plan for, or you convince yourself that future you will handle the consequences. Future you becomes a kind of emotional storage unit for present discomfort. But here's where things get even more interesting. Most people believe they are making decisions for their future self. In reality, they are often negotiating with their present emotions. And present emotions are persuasive. They speak louder than long-term thinking. They demand attention now, not later. So, the mind chooses relief over strategy, comfort over structure, immediate balance over delayed benefit. And afterward, when the emotional wave passes, logic returns. That's when reflection begins. That's when regret appears, not as punishment, but as a realization, a quiet awareness that something in the process did not align with your deeper intentions. Yet, even that realization often fades with time, because life moves forward, new situations appear, new emotional triggers emerge, and the cycle finds its way back into motion. But there's something else that quietly influences financial behavior, something many people overlook entirely: identity. The way you see yourself shapes what you believe you deserve, what you believe is possible, and what you unconsciously allow yourself to maintain. If, deep down, you see yourself as someone who struggles with money, your decisions often align with that identity without you realizing it. Not because you want to struggle, but because the mind seeks consistency. It prefers familiar stories, even when those stories are limiting. And changing financial behavior without addressing identity is like trying to change direction while still holding on to the same map. You may move differently for a moment, but the underlying route keeps pulling you back. This is why some people can learn all the financial strategies in the world and still find themselves repeating the same outcomes. Knowledge alone is not enough when emotional habits and identity patterns remain untouched. And there's another layer that often goes unnoticed: the decision fatigue. Every day, the mind makes countless small choices: what to focus on, what to ignore, what to respond to, what to postpone. By the time financial decisions appear, mental energy is already worn down. And when the mind is tired, it seeks simplicity, not optimal outcomes, but easy ones. Easy often means familiar, and familiar often means repeating what has been done before, even if it did not serve you well. This is why some people find themselves repeating the same financial cycles: spending to feel better, saving only when guilt appears, avoiding financial planning until pressure becomes unavoidable. It's not a lack of discipline in the way people usually think about it. It's a pattern of emotional conditioning playing out quietly in the background. And there's another layer that often goes unnoticed: the ever-increasing opportunity for immediate gratification. Every click, every swipe, every quick purchase reinforces the unconscious belief that relief or reward should be instant. And when that happens, the mind begins to view long-term planning as a form of unnecessary delay. This is why sometimes the best financial strategy is not about adding more complexity, but about rediscovering simplicity. Slowing down the decision, quieting the impulse, and recognizing that the deepest needs aren't always the ones that scream the loudest. And there is another hidden influence that many people overlook: financial stress. It doesn't just affect your bank account, it changes how your brain makes decisions. When stress is high, the mind shifts into survival mode, prioritizing immediate threats and relief over long-term strategic thinking. Suddenly, complex financial choices feel overwhelming, and the mind gravitates towards the simplest option, even if it's not the best one. And this is how stress quietly shapes your financial future more than most decisions ever do. Yet, even with all of this working in the background, something important remains true. Awareness changes everything. The moment you begin to notice these patterns, you create space between impulse and action. That space may feel small at first, almost insignificant, but it's in that space where change begins to form. Because within it, you are no longer reacting automatically. You are observing, you are considering, you are choosing, even if only briefly, instead of being carried. And over time, those brief moments of awareness begin to accumulate. There is another shift that happens when awareness deepens. You start to recognize that money is not just about spending or saving. It is about emotional regulation. It is about how you handle stress, how you respond to uncertainty, how you process comparison, how you deal with discomfort when life does not match expectations. Money becomes less about numbers and more about behavior, less about information and more about patterns, less about external circumstances and more about internal states. And this is where the real transformation becomes possible. Because when you stop treating financial decisions as isolated events and start seeing them as reflections of your emotional world, everything begins to make more sense. The confusion starts to dissolve. The frustration starts to soften. Not because the challenges disappear, but because the patterns become visible. And what becomes visible can be understood. What can be understood can be changed. But change is not instant. It rarely arrives as a sudden shift. It builds slowly through repeated moments of awareness, reflection, and small adjustments in behavior. Through choosing pause instead of impulse. Through choosing reflection instead of reaction. Through choosing long-term alignment instead of short-term relief. And even then, setbacks happen. Old patterns resurface, emotional moments return. But now there is something different, a growing ability to recognize what is happening while it is happening. That recognition alone is powerful, because it interrupts the cycle just enough to create a different outcome. And over time, those different outcomes begin to reshape the larger pattern of your financial life. There is a quiet truth hidden inside all of this. Most people do not struggle with money because they lack intelligence or capability. They struggle because they are human. And being human means being influenced by emotion, environment, memory, and identity in ways that are not always obvious. Once you understand that, judgment starts to fade. And in its place, something more useful appears. Curiosity, patience, a willingness to observe rather than criticize. And that shift alone can change everything. Because when you stop fighting yourself and start understanding yourself, financial decisions begin to feel less like battles and more like choices, less like traps and more like opportunities to respond differently. There is still another layer worth noticing. Even when people begin to improve their financial habits, there is often a lingering resistance, a quiet voice that pulls them back toward old patterns. Not because those patterns are better, but because they are familiar. And familiarity can feel like comfort, even when it limits growth. This is why progress often feels uneven, not a straight line upward, but a path with pauses, reflections, and returns. Each return is not failure, it is information. It shows where emotional triggers still hold influence. It shows where awareness can deepen further. And each moment of awareness weakens the pull of automatic behavior just a little more, until slowly the balance begins to shift. Not perfectly, not permanently, but meaningfully. And eventually, you begin to notice something subtle but powerful. You are no longer just reacting to money, you are relating to it differently. More consciously, more intentionally, more aligned with the life you actually want to build rather than the emotions you are trying to escape. And that is the real turning point. Because once that shift begins, it does not stay confined to money alone. It expands into how you make decisions in general, how you handle pressure, how you respond to uncertainty, how you define progress in your own life. And suddenly, what once felt like a cycle becomes something else entirely. A process of awareness, a practice of reflection, a gradual return to control that was never truly lost, only buried beneath habit and emotion. So the next time a financial decision appears in front of you, it may not feel different at first. The temptation, the pressure, the emotional pull may still be there. But now there is space. And in that space, everything can change. If this resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe for more reflections like this, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.